Hey, Chauncey, you want some depressing history?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like you really want it,
I
though.
mean, you know,
Take
I
your
don't how
medicine.
about yes, yes. I'll confront the history of my
You'll
mother.
confront. Okay, so this isn't actually bad stuff we did this time. I want to take it to Russia, specifically the fact that they have never really had a fair election in that country's history. So the 2007, 2011, 2016, and 2021 elections have all been accused of being heavily rigged in favor of the ruling United Russia Party by a plethora of journalists and foreign observers. Reportedly, soldiers working for the government forced many individuals at voting stations to cast votes for the ruling party through threat of violence. And the final vote count reported by the United Russian Party differed heavily from the vote count tallied by observers from rival political parties and the foreign press. And in 2021, observers were not really even allowed to take part in the election at all due to allegedly COVID-19 restrictions. And on top of all of this, the ability of parties other than the United Russia Party to do any kind of like campaigning has been pretty non-existent due to various laws restricting political activity by non-government entities and by intimidation from authorities and violent supporters of the president. So this has been going on since the 90s, but it's thought that the elections in Russia in sort of the late 90s and very early 2000s were probably a lot more fair than they are today. It's kind of the
Crazy.
mid 2000s to today that they've been like, yeah, we're not really going to try to do this whole democracy thing.
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, it's always amazing to me that people put up with this sort of thing, because these are massive populations. You think about North
Sure.
Korea. I mean, those people aren't doing very good, yet they put up with this dude. They actually kind of sound like they like him sometimes. They believe their own stuff, and I'm under the impression Russians kind of like Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, well, again, it's kind of hard to know how many do and how many don't due
Right.
to
Yeah.
like polls aren't any more accurate than the elections, right? And no one's really doing polls in the first place.
Well, Americans seem to like him more.
Ugh. Yeah, they shouldn't because he sucks.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I'm just always amazed that one person or even a group of people, are able to control a population. Another thing that irritates me is
Mhm.
is we've talked about this, people's use of words, um, and that Russia is not a communism. It has never been a communism. If it was a communism, it was for like 48 hours at best, you know. And people take the word communism and apply it to places like Russia and China for some, and they just ain't.
Well, I feel like okay, I can push back on that one a little bit because I feel like the USSR, I mean, obviously they failed to like achieve the goals of communism, but capitalism has arguably failed to achieve the goals of capitalism, but we still call the real thing that existed in the real world that was practiced by capitalists capitalism. So I feel like it's fair to call what communism sort of ended up being in the USSR a form of communism.
Well, it was more of an oligarch.
Well, yeah, but that has nothing to do with communism. Communism is a economic system. The political
Yeah,
system is irrelevant to
yeah,
whether it's communist or not. And
I
it
guess.
was essentially communist in the sense that, there was no private property. There was no sort of like there was sort of worker control in a sense, but again, that tied into the sort of political problems of the country. Like, but there's no question they didn't like achieve what the dreams of sort of the communist revolutionaries were, but and their system sucked. Like, let's not mince words. The USSR was bad news, but I don't know. I think it's fair to say they got as close to like communism as anyone did, and the party was called the Communist Party. I think we need to judge the facts of communism based on what it turned out to be like, not based on what it was supposed to be.
Well, do you think that You think it's a dictatorship now?
Well, I think it's an oligarchy, essentially. But it's I think the US is an oligarchy too, honestly. They're much closer to a dictatorship. Like I don't think our elections are truly fair, but they're certainly closer.
You think
You
Trump?
know, there are degrees, and I think their elections they essentially might as well not have them, because there's no way for the ruling party to lose if they're the only ones allowed to campaign, and they are the ones who get to say what the vote count was.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
they're the ones who get to say, hey, we won.
Right.
So, which is like, we don't have that in our system. Like, our voting system, I think the electoral college sucks and all that, but like, I think our system, at least as it is now, is relatively secure against that kind of thing, just because the people in charge of it up until now have basically been like local officials who aren't very partisan.
Right.
I know there has been a big push since 2020. Like, Steve Bannon on his show has been like telling people, go out and run for these offices and then make sure Trump wins, essentially. It's like, which seemed like a conflict of interest, but
right.
Seems like they shouldn't be able to get elected, but they can. So like, I think there are serious vulnerabilities. I don't think those vulnerabilities have necessarily been exploited. And it's not the same situation in like countries like Russia, where election fraud happens because the ruling party controls every level of the election.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, you succeeded.
I depressed you?
That is
You've been
depressing.
depressed?
I'm
Good.
thinking maybe we should do the depressing part not right at the end. So
Yeah.
on a downer note, see you next week.
Look, I'm here to hurt people and cause problems.
Oh, okay. Well,
that's my whole thing. So
job well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland. Check us out next week.